So we are now recording the meeting. If anybody else wants to record the meeting, please just let us know that that's happening. We're calling this meeting to order. I just want to do a roll call of the members. We have a quorum. So Tim Fisk, chair, is here. JJ White, Marcella Flam, Andrea CK, Hannah Reckstaffen, and Mary Chicoine. So we are missing Empress, Hannah Brookman, and Hillary. Before we get started in the grant process, I wanted to read a statement. I had some reflections from our last meeting, and I wanted to share them with the council. So I'm just going to read from the statement. So over the last 11 months, the Greenfield Cultural Council's developed and implemented a community-informed process by which we evaluate projects applying for funding in our annual grant-making cycle. Our shared goal has been to deepen the impact we have as a council by implementing and articulating a set of local priorities that speak to feedback we received through a public survey. Through this public process, we concretized the community's mandate to prioritize projects that met specific criteria, including but not limited to social justice and cultural diversity events that promote diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in our community, and that address historical inequities in the distribution of resources. During our November 4th meeting of this council, we engaged in a conversation about our local Juneteenth celebration that, upon reflection, I personally found to be problematic, insensitive, and in opposition to the values and spirit of our published local priorities. As a cultural council, I believe we have an obligation to bring our informed subjectivity and goodwill to the table when we discuss how we support vital community enterprises that specifically lift up those who are marginalized and who consistently struggle on an uneven playing field, a system that favors one group of people over the other. When presented with a clear and legitimate path for funding Juneteenth, one of the only events in Greenfield that addresses the struggles of our Black and African American neighbors, we entertained rejecting the application outright upon a technicality, when clearly the choice that aligns with our specific local priorities would have been to prioritize conditional funding of other budget items present in the application, which we're empowered to do in accordance with the grant contingencies and requirements section of the MCC's Local Cultural Council program guidelines. On the eve of a presidential election where the first ever Black woman was running on a major party ticket, I believe we chose self-aggrandizing over humility. To argue that it's only fair that the grant be taken at face value and disqualified on a technicality would, in my opinion, suggest that fairness is a concept we members only understand in the context of our own white privilege, and therefore could disqualify us from being able to serve on a council that prioritizes that which is systemically unfair. I strongly urge my fellow council members to honor the directives from our community stakeholders and find every available and legitimate opportunity to support those applications that celebrate our diverse community and that lift up those who have historically faced exclusion from such support. It aligns with our local priorities, and frankly, it's just the right thing to do. Thank you for letting me read that. I also would like to say that as a point of order, for the remainder of this discussions around the grants, anybody that's recusing themselves will be put into the waiting room of the Zoom. So they will not be present in the conversation, and will be brought back in once the conversation is finished.
Tim?
Yeah.
If we have the technical leeway to work with the grant applicant to conditionally approve related material, in other words, to help refine the application, I mean, if we have the leeway to do that, I think that is actually fair. I'm going to say a couple of other things. I think it's actually important that we know that we can say no to a sitting member. I mean, it was very awkward, and I appreciate your solution of putting people out of the room. I appreciate that. But, and she was so gracious. We did say no, and she was so gracious. So I think all things considered, I would vote for kind of leeway in terms of interacting with the applicant.
Thanks, Andrea. JJ has his hand up.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was playing around with my technology Zoom, and I didn't get who that letter, or if that was a letter or a statement that was coming from you, or if it was a letter from, which I think it was from another council member.
It was from me personally.
Oh, okay, and it was about the Juneteenth. Okay,
It was
great.
about the conversation,
Yeah.
not the
Okay.
movement.
Thank you.
Thank you. Um, I just want to open up, Marcel. You have your hand raised.
Yeah, I mean, thanks Tim for the statement, and I think that I echo much of what was said there. Yeah, I mean, I'll say that between our last meeting and this one, I talked to a friend who's a professional arts administrator, and I sort of described the situation, sort of the outlines of it, and the thing I heard from her, which I found really useful, was that she encouraged me to think about and to bring back to the group distinguishing between kind of procedural justice and substantive justice as a way of thinking about a situation like this. And that, in a way, it's interesting to think about how procedural justice, in the way of really strictly enforcing sort of rules and regulations, sort of as they're written down, is actually a way that inequity has been perpetuated in the arts and elsewhere. Like, it's how redlining works in lending, for example. And so, yeah, I found that framing really useful for me, that if the sort of guidelines that we came up with reflect a commitment to substantive justice, then I tend to agree that it's incumbent upon us to use the tools that we have to sort of pursue that goal. And, you know, that doesn't mean funding projects that are unworthy. It doesn't mean sort of, you know, treating people unfairly, right? But I think really centering our desire to get it right substantively and not just procedurally is a way of proceeding that I found really resonant.
Hannah has her hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. I apologize for not being at the last meeting. I did watch the recording of it, and it's good to be here tonight. I had two thoughts as I was watching the meeting that I wanted to offer as on the heels of what Marcel you're saying, which I think is really helpful. I had two thoughts about sort of procedural rules that we might want to consider. One is trying to fund corresponding to a budget item as often as possible. So I don't know why this has never really occurred to me before after years on this council. We always kind of like pulled numbers out of the air and tried to keep them kind of round. And I think especially when we were trying to fund everyone and it ended up being these little things, this was harder. But now that we're thinking more about trying to fund in a substantial way, and, you know, if we can look at a budget in an application, this is why the budget is there, and say, like Hannah said in the last meeting, I put this amount in because this was the amount of the actual art piece itself. And so that seemed like a good number to pull. So I think that might be procedurally something that's helpful if we actually choose a budget line, and then it becomes easier to communicate as well to the applicant. And in conjunction with that, I think we should consider sort of making it a standing procedure of this council to say that it is acceptable to fund an alternate budget item from the one that is requested and conditionally go to the applicant and say, we are not able to fund, in this example, scholarships. However, we would be happy to fund the stage setup and music equipment. And if I can't imagine that an applicant would be like, no, thanks, I really wanted the first thing. I would imagine any applicant would be like, yes, absolutely, thank you, that's great. So I just wanted to offer those two budgetary things as sort of anchors that we could kind of depend on both in our language and in our decision making. And I also had a really quick question around the type column in the spreadsheet. Is that column the type of application, or is it the the type of ask that the application is making, or is the type the project itself? Does that make sense? That was a little unclear to me in the last discussion.
So we have three green choices: live performances and festivals, social justice and cultural diversity events, public art, and then there's an other that's in orange. And in our local priorities, we actually talked specifically about those types of programs.
So we're defining the type of the whole project, not the type of the ask that someone is making.
Yeah, so like it
right?
says
Okay.
types of projects in the priorities.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that because that was a little unclear in the last meeting.
I also, I've spent a lot of time in these local priorities, and this is the first time we're doing this like this, so it's okay that it's messy. But I think other things that came up in our last conversation were like, well, if it's for the public, then by nature of the demographics of our town, it would be falling within these target communities. But I will just point to the language that's in the priorities. Priority will be given to projects that directly address the experience of and or are created by those who identify as. So I think it's a little more explicit in the priorities. And I just point that out because I know that everybody's trying to understand the rubric and really, come to the table with the best intentions. I don't doubt that. But we can lean into some of this language to help us narrow down. That was the whole point of doing this process, was to narrow things down a little bit.
Sure. Yeah.
We left off on grant line number 6, which would be Pioneer Valley Symphony. Does everybody have that on their own record? I just want to be sure I didn't like sort by a column on my list and put it out of order for everybody.
Could we actually reshare that spreadsheet document? Or was it in the agenda?
It was not in the agenda. But yes, that's absolutely possible. Looking at this first, you shared it as an attachment, right, Christian? As actually a OneDrive share.
Yeah, I'm going to send the link right now again.
Doing that. Yeah, and then we were all sent, I think, our own copy of it too, which I, messed up on my end, but I'm trying to I'm entering in suggestions for the grant amount. We're not, per last time, we're not making decisions until we get to the end of the process and we look at what we have suggested, what's left to allocate. Mary, have your hand raised.
So did we just agree that we're going to follow a different process whereby we'll fund things that the applicant hasn't asked for, as Hannah just suggested? And does that mean we should go back and relook at all of the evaluations we did? And also, should we back up and relook at what we did in our first meeting or our previous meeting to see if any of them would be impacted by this, if we're agreeing to do this?
Hannah, did you have your hand raised? Did you want to answer to that?
Yeah, is that okay?
Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify, and this might be a semantic thing, but I wasn't recommending funding something that they weren't asking for, but rather offering to fund a different part of the project, especially to Tim's point, when that project is fulfilling a need or serving a community that we have specifically said we are going to do everything in our power to prioritize. And I think since we've only gotten through 2 applications, I mean, we could certainly go back and look at the other one. I don't remember there being any question around it. Everything that we removed that was sort of zeroed out was because it wasn't in Greenfield. So otherwise I would say yes, we should go back and review them, but I'm pretty sure everything that was the point that we were sort of nixing. But going forward, yeah, I think if it's the difference between saying to an applicant like, sorry, the thing you asked for is not something we can fund, and so we're pulling your application. If there's something in there that does fall into our purview, then I would suggest funding it.
I think we can take this as we're doing the analysis, and we can certainly look back at Greenfield High School's application, though we did put in there $500 as a grant amount, so there's really nothing to go back and review. We will have a second round of looking at all of these numbers, but that's a good question, Mary, and I think we absolutely can just do it in real time.
Okay, but I'm asking if this is something that the group agreed upon.
We're empowered to do it. It doesn't have to be agreed.
Okay, well, but we can make a group decision, right?
Are you calling for the group decision? You want to make a
Yeah, I'm
motion?
curious if the group agrees with this idea that we would fund other items. Thank you, Hannah, for re-explaining that. Other items that are in the budget that the applicant provides that they didn't ask for. Is that something that everybody agrees with?
Yeah,
I feel comfortable with that.
yeah.
I think so. We can't technically fund scholarships, so I think it would be fair to ask them to resubmit. I mean,
I don't know if we can do that though, because the applications were already due.
We don't have to. We don't have to. We can
All right.
provide provisional funding of a different line item. We're empowered to do that.
Andrea, did you say can or can't fund scholarships?
I thought that we couldn't fund scholarships,
They changed it this year that where you can.
or that we may.
Yep.
Can you provide us with the documentation on that, Christian? Because that I feel like my strong assumption was that we couldn't do that, which I think
Yes,
is
I'm here.
And also too, I'm not trying to like move us past something, but like there were some really valid points that came up in that conversation that there was no articulation of like how the scholarships would be appointed. Like there were a lot of gray areas there, whether we can finally do it or not, to kind of like justify that the conversation was apt. JJ, do you want to say something?
Well, I was just, chiming in with like everybody else. We're talking about the Juneteenth, which I thought part of the reason we were maybe declined it or thought about declining it was because it was about scholarships. It wasn't about supporting the event, correct?
Yes,
Right.
the scholarships were the part that actually brought about the discussion of disqualifying the grant.
Right. So, I guess if to speak to your earlier point at the beginning, I am in favor of, or I think it's also useful for us as a committee to sort of honor and address those events and those organizations and proposals that have historically been, shunned aside as a result of the systematic racism and cultural avenues that have been closed off. So that's just my 2 cents.
Thank you, JJ. Hannah had her hand up, and then Christian's sharing screen. So do you want to? Did you highlight the part, Christian? So it reads, we have removed the restriction on LCC grants funding scholarships and food. Okay. I do though still want to honor some of the things that were raised in the conversation last week, though. There were problems with just even the process of the allocation of scholarships. There didn't seem to be a process articulated in the conversation. So, Mary?
I was just going to say that my rejection of the proposal was based solely on the fact that there were no details provided. I don't consider myself to be a racist, but I feel like the statement that you read at the beginning had some tones that some of us were in some way not being sensitive to the fact that this was a Juneteenth celebration, which I was extremely sensitive to, and I was trying to be as careful as possible to say that as the applicant was sitting in on the conversation. So I was trying to do the best I could do. And I really have to say that I don't appreciate the tone of your reading a statement to us at the beginning. You may have thought it was the right thing to do, but it felt very scolding to me. So.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I was not happy with the way the conversation went, and so I stand behind my statement. But thank you, Mary.
And I'm not happy with the way that you are treating some of us in a dismissive manner. And I stand behind that statement as well.
Okay, thank you, Mary. So that being said, I don't believe we need to go back to the Greenfield High School application. I don't think we need to belabor the Juneteenth application anymore. We've disqualified the third and fourth because they're just not in the Greenfield location that's required for us. The next is the outdoor sculpture You Are Here, which we did start a conversation about. Marcel.
I was just gonna say, I mean, quickly about Juneteenth, that yeah, it seems to me that if we're gonna circle back to finalize numbers, then I guess I would propose that we make the decision at that time about whether there is an appetite to fund scholarships now that we have the information that Christian shared with us, that that is in theory possible, or whether we would prefer to fund other budget line items. So, I mean, yeah, my feeling is that I would feel comfortable saving that decision for later and sort of continuing to work through the list, unless anyone has an objection.
I think that's a good idea, Marcel. And then also your suggestion from the last time we met would make more sense to me, which is that then we could put a condition upon funding a scholarship, like providing information on what the scholarship would be based upon and how it would be used. So I appreciate that.
Awesome. Okay, great. So the next one was outdoors in the center of your town, which was the outdoor sculpture You Are Here. Jennifer Powell was the applicant. We did have a preliminary conversation about this before we ran out of time. Some of the things that came up, just to remind everybody, was that this just seemed like a project that's being shopped around to lots of cultural councils for funding. But to go back to Hannah, Hillary, Empress, Hannah, you reviewed this. Hillary and Empress aren't on the call. What was your take?
I was not interested in funding this project. I didn't really find it inspiring, and I thought that it was somebody exactly trying to shop it around to all of the cities, and we would pay them to produce this very generic thing that would just be 1 in a million that they would hypothetically get a local artist to like paint on. And I just don't find it inspiring, and I'd rather spend our money on artists who are doing interesting work in our town.
Great. Does anybody else have any input? Does anybody want to suggest a grant amount or a zero amount?
I would feel comfortable zeroing that one out for the reasons that Hannah just described.
I agree.
Yeah, I would say
Me
zero.
too. Great. Great. The next one is Molten Belly Dance Series. Emily Gaylord, the Lava Center in Greenfield, was Mary, Empress, and Hannah that reviewed that grant.
I'm curious if Christian could share the sheet that we worked off of last time. I found that really helpful. Or maybe Tim, you shared it.
Yeah,
Like
Tim, I
the
made
big spreadsheet?
yeah, I made you a co-host, Tim. I'm actually taking the minutes, so
I feel like I'm kind of flying blind because it's been a few weeks since we reviewed them, so.
Just let me know if you can see it. I can make it bigger. I have kind of a large screen here.
Yeah, maybe a little bit bigger.
How about that?
Great, thank you.
I think we missed Pioneer Valley
Thank
Symphony.
you.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Did. We absolutely did. Good thing I made it bigger. So Pioneer Valley Symphony, which was Marcel, Hannah, and Andrea Peer Gynt 2025 education concert at Greenfield High School.
I don't have a lot to say. It meets our criteria. They'll pull it off, it seems like. I think I recommended partial funding.
Same. That was pretty much my thoughts.
Okay. Does any of you guys want to make a suggestion on the funding? The ask was for $2,000.
I suggested 5, I think. It's probably in Christian's numbers already.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, we did that whole minimum maximum average too, just for you guys to see right here. It was 500 was the minimum, 850 was the maximum suggested, which left an average of 617. JJ, you were going to say something? Sorry.
No, I wasn't.
Okay.
I think I was going to chime in and say I think 500 I would feel good about as well. I'm just looking at the proposal again, and so it says the target audience is Franklin County 3rd and 4th graders and their educators, and then I guess it'll be streamed as well. So yeah, I feel like there's definitely public impact, but it seems like it's primarily for the school audience and yeah, kind of secondarily for a broader public. So I think for that reason, I'm okay with going on the lower end of the scale rather than something that sort of robustly was for the public as a whole.
Okay. We can put 500 in there and we can come back. We are going to come back. So I just was making those purple so I remembered where we were. And then we can move on. So the next one would be the Molten Belly Dance Series. Emily Gaylord, project location is the Lava Art Center. And they asked for $2,000 as well. The spread on recommendations was $300 to $1,000. So Mary and Hannah, if you guys have any input there.
I have down partial funding, so 1,000.
Mm-hmm.
And I had suggested 450. I think kind of based on the fact that it wasn't, they weren't targeting one of the audiences that we said was a priority. Yeah. I think I also did some sort of formula based on how much total money we had to distribute, and so sort of tried to keep that in mind as well.
Is it helpful if I hit on the grant itself and like just look at the budget that they talked about? The total budget, 2,745, 1,800 of which is salaries and fees, 300 of which is marketing and promotion, 450 is space rental. And then 195 in food and beverage.
I did find it helpful last time when we would kind of put in the higher end of the funding, and then when we go back through to knock things down. And so I think, we could put this one in at most partial funding at like 2,000, and then be able to go back through and knock it down if we, don't have enough to go around.
Sure. And That's one way that we can do it, yep. So were you saying to put in $1,000?
That was what I suggested, but I, would be persuaded to go lower if we want to start lower. That was just what I think the maximum we could probably swing for this one would be.
I wonder
And-
about, excuse
Go
me.
ahead, Mary. Go
I was
ahead.
just wondering about maybe doing the average, because that would mean that 3 people looked at it and that would,
Mhm.
at least get us
Mhm.
closer to probably where we're gonna need to end up.
Yeah, so 583 is what that is.
Mhm.
Sure.
And should I do that for the one before too? 617 was the average for the Pioneer Valley Symphony.
Oh, interesting, yeah.
So I
Sorry.
wonder, I just want to suggest again, potentially trying to go off of the budget. So like in this case, if we wanted to do like
Space rental.
space rental and marketing and promotion would be 750, or space rental and other would be 645. Is that right?
Mhm.
I'm really bad at math. I don't know, just to keep it so that like when we do go through, if we have to go through and knock things off, we could even put comments in there that's like, this is these two things. We're gonna knock it down to one, or we're gonna do half of, I don't know, just to kind of like keep it maybe a little more round. I feel like getting a check for 617 is kind of odd, but getting a check for 750 is great. I don't know.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it also might help us to whittle it down if we have to take money away. Like say we combined the space rental and the other and made it 645, which is what I think that adds up to, and we have to come down. We could potentially take out the other, which is 195. And go down to 450. I do want to say that this project does not, I don't think it actually speaks to our target communities, nor does the one before. And I'm happy to go through that on the second round. I just want to bring it up. It just says, and all of our priorities, they just say priority will be given. So it doesn't say that we won't fund. So does anybody object to 645? Which is it's kind of a combo of what the average and these two line items. 450, 195. I'm just double checking my math. 645. Yeah. All right. Then the next one is Tuckerman Glasses LLC, 100 Years of Movies in the Lobby of the Garden Theater. This was JJ, Marcel, and Andrea.
Yeah, I kind of like this one. I think it has, quite a bit of impact, and I also kind of wanted to support the theater, especially the way Isaac I think is managing it, as a public asset in an interesting way. I suggested like a small proportion of what they asked for, but I think it'll be a nice event and support what he's trying to do there.
This is Marcel. Yeah,
$1,500.
oh, go ahead, JJ. Go ahead.
I was just gonna talk about the budget, but there's salaries and fees at 1,020, and then supplies and materials are 480.
Hmm.
So, Marcel, what were you gonna say?
Yeah, no, I mean, actually, that 480 is interesting as sort of I think I suggested on the higher side. I think I put in 750 originally, but also not a project that targets one of our target demographics. So yeah, I'd be comfortable on the lower side if we wanted to start with that 480, for example.
Any objections to that? Okay. The next was Community Stage, myself, Hannah, and Mary. Yeah, Friends of Franklin County Fairgrounds. Anybody want to chime in? on it. I know I put 0 just because it doesn't hit our priority communities.
Oh,
I was hoping that
put
we could
full.
more fully fund some projects. But I think it's a
I
great
put
project.
fully fund. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you put fully fund, Hannah?
I put fully fund. I don't have the application in front of me right now, but I remember feeling like it was a cool thing for maybe the cultural council to be a part of funding is, and it would support local artists, local acts at the fair. It just seemed even, I think I did, oh no, I guess I said, I don't know about the target communities, but I just also thought it was a cool idea for the local cultural council to even formally sponsor this stage and to formally sponsor this, venue for local artists to perform at the festival and at the fair.
Great, yeah. The full budget is $20,000. Again, just the ask was 1,500. The salaries and fees are 12,000, productions 4,000, and equipment rental is 4,000 in their budget.
And I suggested 500,
500.
I think.
Does anybody have an objection to 500? Hannah, would you like to see it higher?
I think it's a cool thing that the cultural council could have a good impact on. But I'm not gonna, fight for it.
Okay. Um,
I was trying to look back to see, okay, 14 acts. I think I did some sort of math to figure out 14 acts, $12,000 performer fees.
Yeah, 857. I was just looking at that too. And
Uh-huh.
like where Mary's thinking about it, that's where my head went to. And it says there are 9 Franklin County musical groups and 5 performing arts groups. And I wish they said how many were in Greenfield, but maybe funding one act at like 857 and being like, we can tell ourselves that that's the band from Greenfield. I don't know.
yeah,
That makes sense.
I also think, I'm just looking back at this now and right under the budget, it says projected income. So it looks like they have 18,500 that they're anticipating. So that leaves 1,500. And so I think I was suggesting funding 1/3 of that.
mhm,
I'm not saying that's what we should do, just I was trying to recollect what my rationale was.
sure. Um, okay. So anybody have an objection to putting $850 in?
Sounds good.
Okay. We are, just as an update, we're on the 9th grant and we have 37, almost $4,000 of the 23,000 that we had to allocate. And I can keep, if you want to know that number, just ask me and I'll pull down. The next one is Franklin County Pride. So the Pride Festival is asking for $1,500 on a budget of $15,415. JJ.
Yeah, I think this is one of those where I should be, probably put into the lobby or the waiting room or the
Sure.
I mean, look, I'm a little new to all this, conflict of interest and stuff. I mean, I've been a donor to Franklin County Pride. I've participated in the parade, actually in the parade 3 times, I think. So maybe it's, yeah, I would have a positive view of this application, but I could also. So up to you, Chair.
Well, if you want to recuse yourself, you can, but I'll say this, like, I've gone to most of these events that exist and have enjoyed them quite a bit. And I don't think that that disqualifies me from having a conversation about the merits of the grant.
Yeah, I mean, I would feel that way too. I just was kind of being cautious, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll hang out.
So my vibe in general is reflected in my number. I put 500 or higher, having a sense that we really, I was trying to be proportional when I went to 500. I feel like for us, it's a pretty good fistful of money, and but I'm open to other evaluations.
Sure. And their printed material line is 500. It could align with what Hannah said. It definitely hits our target demographic.
I think if it's possible for us to fund a little more, honestly, by virtue of what's happening in our community, I guess I feel like full-throated support is important right now. I feel similarly about Juneteenth. I feel similarly about Nolan Bika. I think I bring this up every time we do the grant cycle, but I think as much as we can fund Pride and other communities that are actively maybe feeling under attack is a good stance.
Okay.
I agree with Hannah, and it's a big citywide event. We should have a stamp of participating on that.
Yes. And also too, I think it should be recategorized as a cultural diversity event, not as a live performance event.
Uh,
Yeah.
Well, I think given like the fact that it hits our target demographic, it's in Greenfield and hits the type that we should definitely, if we're going to give out $850 or consider $850 to the community stage, this is of similar merit, if not more, because of the community targets.
I agree. So I thought 500 was low, personally.
I would recommend 950, which would cover marketing and promotion and ensuring access for ASL interpreters. Those both feel like things that are well within our sort of desired impact.
Right. Okay. Well, again, we can put it in at 950 and then we can always come back. We are going to come back.
Yeah.
I suspect that will be over at the end.
Probably.
We'll have to dial down on the ones that we said yes to, which, okay. If anybody has anything else to add, otherwise I'll move on to Hilltown Youth Performing Arts Program. This is the Hilltown Youth Recovery Theater and the Recovery Project. They're doing Kinky Boots in Greenfield and in Heath. If you're anybody familiar with Hilltown Youth, they work with like at-risk youth.
Yes.
And theater with at-risk youth.
I am familiar. I'm familiar with them. Yeah, I mean, actually, my wife and I hosted an event that was like a fundraising event in our yard. It was kind of during the pandemic, and I found what they did was pretty interesting and different. The at youth population, which does include young people from Greenfield, and they were, involved in. I wouldn't quite call it, circus, but it was, kind of performing, and then the talk that they gave focused on the programs and the kinds of youth who kind of needed a place to be and to be seen and to be accepted. And this theater organization seemed to provide that. And I, just thought it was it hit our target group. And I haven't looked at the money amount, but I would be in favor of funding it.
My only question is, are they going to do a performance in Greenfield?
It said Greenfield and Heath, but that could be.
It said that, but I don't know that it actually identified the venue in Greenfield.
No, it didn't. That was my question, and I also thought it was $3,000 for a venue seemed super steep, although maybe I haven't rented a venue for a performance, but
Sure.
$3,000 in Greenfield, I don't know.
Yeah, it's steep.
I think, and I don't know, but sometimes when the youth are performing, they set up these very large kind of trapeze kinds of things. At least they did in our backyard. But again, I'm not. I don't have any. I guess we could see clarification if we wanted to, but it seemed to be. Well, I mean, can we make it conditional on a performance in Greenfield?
We could. We sure could.
Well, it does say they're seeking a Greenfield venue, so one would assume that they're having a performance in Greenfield.
Yeah.
Don't we have something about a date and a venue has to be confirmed?
I don't know that it says that in the priorities. We've talked about it.
I think, yeah, in the local guidelines, I think we say, yeah, successful proposals typically include a detailed plan for project implementation. So I think we're giving ourselves permission to weight that among other considerations, as far as having something like a letter of support.
Yeah, so to continue including a confirmed date and venue. So it's a local guideline, and it doesn't say that we're prioritizing it, but it just says successful proposals typically include. I wouldn't object to something being in here, but when it comes to going back to all these numbers, it's stuff like that I'm going to definitely bring to the conversation when we're talking about whittling things down, or, So if somebody wants to suggest, like 750 was the high, 0 was the low, so 350 was the mid. This is a $50,000 budget with big line items. I don't think we can look at the line item strategy per se.
Wow.
Mary's point, 3,000 is a lot of money. They're not going there.
I think in my review, I suggested 500, just based on the lack of clarity around the performance in Greenfield. Was it multiple performances for $3,000? That wasn't clear.
Okay.
But it seemed, seemed like it hit target audiences, although it was not explicit, but.
Okay. All right, so if we put 500 in, we can move on and come back to it. The Brick House Community Resource Center, Liberation Playback Theater, their 2025 season, which will be taking place at the Lava Center and other venues. It's live performance. It hits our target demographic. This was Empress, JJ, and Hillary. JJ, did you review this grant from the Brick House?
Yeah, yes, I did. And I am just trying to see I guess I wasn't entirely clear if it hit the um, target audience. And I thought since it was in Greenfield, it covered that, and it was performance based, right?
Yep.
So I think I had a favorability for this group, and my apologies once again for not scrolling all the way, many columns to the right and thinking that I didn't put in an amount. So, but I'm sure my other fellow reviewers did. So,
Okay. Great. So 1,500 is the budget. 1,200 was salaries and fees. 150 for space rental. Marketing and promotion 150. I'm just giggling because space rental at 150 and the last application was space rental at 3,000. So I guess it does take quite a range. Yeah, so I feel like with this grant, and again, I'm getting picky because I personally would like us to more fully fund less projects, but that's just my opinion. That, it doesn't necessarily go towards the target population, though it does say like we also target audiences from a lower economic status in rural areas. But it doesn't like speak to the experience of low income people. It's not created by low income people. And I feel like that about a bunch of these grants that we've already awarded money to. So I'm not trying to stop the process of putting a dollar amount in that column. I'm just bringing it up. Anybody want to suggest something? Suggest zero? Or suggest the $250 venues to go to 300? Those two line items that are each 150? I'm going to put it in and move us along.
I'm just curious why we wouldn't use the average if 3 people reviewed it, if nobody else has an opinion, not on this one in particular, but just in general, to kind of help the process along too.
Yeah, for sure. I'm into either of those. So if anybody feels like the average or they feel like the line item, whichever one helps us, like
Yeah.
if a line item is $400 instead of the average of 367, like in the next one, I would more lean towards a 400, but I
Okay.
like 450 is a nice, easy number too. So let's just put that
I
average in.
think 450 feels high for me on this one. I think I liked the 300 because it was the two things,
Sure,
because only a third of their application is in Greenfield.
sure.
I agree with Hannah.
But I hear where Mary's coming from also. But I just, on this one in particular, I think I feel that way.
Yeah, sure. And I think that the average is a good idea too, especially if we're like all being silent and not knowing quite what to say.
Yes, fair. Sorry, I was thinking a lot about Brick House and things I've seen from them.
Okay. I'm gonna put it back to 300 and then we'll move on to Musica Franklin community concert series. They do, I will say they have 2 applications in this year, which we could probably take into consideration when we come back through and look at all the numbers.
This is Marcel. Yeah, I mean, I looked at this one. Yeah, I mean, I think of kind of venerable arts organization in our community. The fact that it's a specifically public sort of concert series, as opposed to one that the public can sneak in, but that is really primarily for sort of a smaller group. So I think I had put in something on the smaller side. Yeah, it's not a target community sorry, I'm just going back to my sheet there to see what number I suggested. I think I had said 500, but I don't feel strongly about it.
Mm. Yeah, I think I had said 600 for kind of similar reasons. I think very highly of Oris, who runs Music of Franklin. I think it's a great experience for all of the students. So I feel like 500 sounds fine to me.
But his students are definitely target for us.
They are.
Mhm.
Yeah, they definitely are.
Great. So the total budget, $3,115, 800 in salaries and fees for 4 guest artists, the teaching staff at 785, admin staff at 750. So food for students is 640, and marketing 40, and supplies for meals 100. So we want to put in $500.
I mean, I feel like that's a good number. I know that's departing a little from my budget rules, but I don't know, between like 500 and 640, I feel like I'm just picturing putting 640 in and then having to knock it down anyway, I guess.
Sure.
So 500 seems like
Nobody
solid.
said that much in the first round. 600 was the high.
That was me, the 600.
Okay. I was 0, but I was being really conservative about giving. I wanted to fully fund a couple of people, so that's why I put it in there.
I know.
How late did we say we wanted to stay this evening?
Oh, is it 6 o'clock? Thank you so much,
We're
Andrea.
close, yeah.
Yeah, it is 6 o'clock right now. Okay, so just to recap, for where we are at right now, we got through grant number 13 of 76.
Woo.
I think we're doing good though. We're at a clip. And we have suggested just under $6,000 with just under $17,000 remaining
Oh my God.
in the process. So we've definitely allocated a third of the money. Everybody's gotten a little piece of the money. Just want to remind everybody that we're doing everything just like kind of like we did last year. And yeah, I think we have to call it for time. And we had talked about doing this every Monday until we were done. Does anybody have an objection to us meeting again next Monday? I know it's the week of Thanksgiving, so
I can be here.
Can be here.
Monday, the 25th.
yeah.
Yeah, I can,
25th, is it the 25th?
Yeah.
I could be here.
Yeah, I could too. And to be honest, if we went 90 minutes, I wouldn't mind. Like just
Yeah, same.
Yeah, but to plan for that though, let's put in for 90.
Okay, so if anybody doesn't have an objection, we'll set the meeting for 90 minutes next time. And yeah, definitely, we just set an hour this time, so it's only fair we do it that way. All right, well,
And can I ask oh, Mary has her hand up and I have a question also before we adjourn.
yes, Mary, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted Tim to ask you to send out the written statement that you read to us. Would you please send it to us all?
Yes.
So I just wanted to ask because I also feel like we always end up giving away such small amounts of money, but I like where we're going with our process of priorities and procedure. I'm not sure how we would take the next step of really turning projects down. And so I just wanted to put that out there that like I'm open to that, to being a tougher granting body, but it's like I think we'd have to take another step further in like, you know, really putting something out there that said, in light of our priorities, we're not, I don't know, it feels like we're not quite there where we could just turn something down outright, only because the tradition has been not to. So I don't know. I don't know what that step would be, but it feels like we would have to keep going a little bit with how we're conceptualizing things. Like we'd really have to say, like, for instance, I don't know if there's a good example on here, so I'll use an example from last year. And I think we actually didn't fund it, but I can't remember 100%. Last year, the Garden Cinema put in an application for a Clint Eastwood movie marathon, which is actually coming up. Isaac will be happy for me to say, everyone, Clint Eastwood's coming up. And I think we didn't fund it because we were like, I don't know if like White Guys and Guns is really where we're at right now with the funding. But that was like a very clear, like was not serving communities that we were trying to serve, was not really like historic, wasn't this, wasn't that. And it was an easier one to kind of say no to. I don't know that they're like cut and dry ones here. I haven't read them all. But I don't know. It would have to be like really cut and dry, I feel like, for us to just be like, no, thanks. So I don't know. I just want to plant that seed for further thought about like how would we really approach being a tougher granting body? Because that is the reality of the granting world.
I mean, maybe conversely, it's also about like which projects, and I don't know that we've like set up our process or our spreadsheets that way, but like, yeah, like which projects blow us away, right? Which projects like really just like
Yeah.
we would really go away heartbroken to sort of not stand behind. And like, yeah, I mean, I don't know that I approached the process in that way. I think I approached it more in a like, well, I'd like to be fair to these different projects, and I'm sure the people are great. But yeah, I mean, I just think that that would be another way to do it, would be to capture exceptional projects rather than acceptable projects.
Ooh. Mm, mhm. I
Mhm.
can make it off if you'll still be able to adjourn, but I had a thing at 6, so I'm going to head to that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Quickly, I wanted to respond to what Hannah said, which I appreciate. Hi, Andrea, you don't have to stay on. I just appreciate what Hannah was saying, and I also wanted to mention that, you know, Christian's put a boatload of work in this, and thank you for that. And I think in the future, if we can keep track of what worked and what didn't, there may be ways we can help the applicants by providing more drop downs of things to choose from. So there's less of this like, well, is it a target community or isn't it? Or, you know, does it meet such and such or doesn't it? If we force them to, you know, click on certain things, then there'll be less of us having to try to figure out, you know, whether it meets certain criteria. So there's, I think both that and then what Marcel was saying about just projects that wow us, you know, it would be cool to also be thinking about that as well.
Christian, you speak to the application, I'm sure.
Yeah, I really like that idea, Mary. Unfortunately, the application is statewide. It's the same application for every local cultural council, so we can't change it. I mean, we can advocate to the Mass Cultural Council to add things like that, like maybe let local cultural councils add their priorities, and then when you apply to that one, but that's a much more convoluted thing than just tweaking it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
All right, thanks everybody for all of your feedback and your time today. We're going to adjourn the meeting and see each other next week at 5 o'clock for 90 minutes.
Woohoo!
Great. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Right.
you. Thank you,
Sure.
Tim. Thank you, Christian.
Bye, everyone.